Climbing Mount Everest remains a dream for many. Every year, many people try to reach the top. Do you know what season it is to climb Mount Everest? May is the season for climbing Mount Everest. Many people have reached the summit of Everest in 2024 as well. There have been some deaths on Mount Everest in 2024. We hope all climbers can climb safely, but the Mount Everest disaster in 1996 will remain in memory. One of the most terrifying and deadly events occurred on Mount Everest in 1996. It was not an ordinary event, but it was a disaster. So, what was the 1996 Mount Everest disaster? The most terrifying event occurred between May 10th and 11th, 1996. The disaster killed nearly 8 people descending from the summit of Everest. During the 1996 Everest expedition, more than 12 people died while descending from the summit of Everest. Who would have imagined that people who were happily descending after climbing Everest would meet such a horrific death? This disaster is still believed to be one of the most bizarre events to have occurred on Mount Everest, as it was deadlier than the Nepal earthquake in 2015. There are many people who want to know the people who died in the Mount Everest disaster in 1996, and the actual number of people who died in the disaster is 8. Those who died in the disaster were: the first is Rob Hall, an American mountaineer and leader of a team of adventure advisors during the final times of preparations before the disaster. After being abandoned by his companions near the summit, the man died. The second is Doug Hansen, an American climber who is part of Rob Hall's mountain climbing team. He died on that dark night while descending from the top of the mountain during a storm. The third is Yasuko Namba, a Japanese mountaineer from Hachijo Island, an experienced mountaineer and a participant in the Adventure Advisors program. But unfortunately, due to the bad weather near the summit, she could not withstand the harsh weather conditions and then died. Fourth, Scott Fisher, an experienced American professional climber and mountaineering trip organizer. He died due to stress, exhaustion, and the impact of climatic conditions while descending the mountain. Tsewang Samanla. In one scene, aspiring climbers from ITBP Team 5, the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, appear. This man was from the Indian camp, and he was killed during the storm. 66 Dorje Morup, another member of the Indo-Tibetan Border People team. He also died with his colleagues in the company 7 Tsewang Paljor. Tsewang, also known as Green Shoe, was part of the Indo-Tibetan Border Police expedition team to Mount Everest in 1996. Climbers gave him this nickname because of his bright shoes that can be seen along the route. He apparently died during the storm. The 8th is New Zealand guide Andy Harris, and the place of his death near the top of the South Anzrenia. The tragedy that became known as the 1996 Mount Everest disaster was the fate of adventure consultants. Led by Rob Hall, a professional mountaineer from New Zealand, it occurred due to adverse weather conditions and unpopular decision-making issues. The team consisted of climbers such as Doug Hansen, a postal worker from Seattle, who was attempting his second attempt to climb Mount Everest. Yasuko Namba, a Japanese businesswoman who needed to become the oldest Japanese woman on the mountain. On May 10, 1996, Hall's team, along with other expeditions, began the final ascent to the summit from Camp 4 in the South Valley. Although the return time was set in advance at 2 a.m., there were many climbers, like Hansen and Nampa, who reached the summit much later than the usual time of 12 noon, which makes the descent particularly risky. The weather was bad in the afternoon, as storms descended on the mountain, causing storms and dropping temperatures. After becoming trapped near the summit, Hall decided to help Hansen, who was unable to descend, and for hours they communicated on the radio before rescuers could reach him, and he died of hypothermia. Hansen, who was one of them, got altitude sickness and was extremely tired. He died shortly before reaching the summit. Nampa was the first to reach the summit, but unfortunately for her, The storm caught her on the way back down, and she froze and eventually died of hypothermia. Rescuers were able to find some team members in near-death situations due to frostbite and injuries. Another climber from another expedition, Beck Withers, was particularly famous for surviving after being left for dead and later surviving, later ending up having to have several of his limbs amputated. This tragedy raised many issues regarding ethics and caution regarding commercial flights. The 1996 Mount Everest disaster, one of the deadliest tragedies in Everest's history, occurred when several teams faced severe weather conditions and delays near the summit. Among the most famous victims were Rob Hall and Scott Fisher, both experienced expedition leaders. Hall's body remained on the mountain for years. Fisher's body was recovered and cremated. Despite the tragic outcome of the 1996 Mount Everest disaster, many climbers managed to survive the unpleasant suffering. American climber Beck Withers has amazingly survived a night spent in harsh conditions near the summit. His story of survival, including severe frostbite that resulted in the loss of his nose, fingers, and parts of his face, is evidence of the strength of the human spirit. Other survivors, including 1996 Everest climber and Russian guide Anatoly Bukreev, played crucial roles in the rescue efforts. The incident on Mount Everest in 1996 involving a guide named Rob Hall was a sad incident in which several people died. This was the culmination of a dramatic story of a mountaineering expedition led by Rob Hall, one of the world's leading guides. However, problems with weather conditions and potential schedule delays caused a series of unfortunate events. Hall and several other clients and climbers fell into the death zone, defined as an area above 26,000 feet, where oxygen is nearly toxic. Despite all his efforts and his team's help, Hal was unable to reach the bottom to save him because his team lost and could not bear the harsh conditions. Unfortunately, due to the harsh environment, he did not survive and died on the mountain. The 1996 disaster on Mount Everest was the result of many factors such as bad weather conditions, crowding of climbers on the mountain, inexperience of some climbers, and communication problems. On May 10th and 11th, an unexpected storm occurred on the mountain. Many climbers were still on the top of the mountain, and it was not easy for them to descend safely. Severe crowding exacerbated the situation. Traffic jams were the main reason behind this, and rescuers were delayed. The novice climbers, some of whom had chartered commercial climbing trips, were ill-equipped to withstand the harsh conditions, which contributed to many deaths. Organizational deficiencies in communications, poor coordination between different teams, and ineffective radio communications also hampered rescue operations and added more misery to the stricken families.
Bukreev has been given due credit, being referred to as a hero for braving the storm to rescue customers. Credit is also given to Neil Bidelman. Neil Bidelman single-handedly dragged 3 members of his team and 2 members of AC down the mountain until he could go no further. It is also detailed how Bukreev courageously saved 3 of these 5. This event has been stuck in the minds of mountaineers for 2 decades. This event has been a long time coming, but in the history of mountaineering, everything seems like it happened yesterday, especially when today is your last event. Everything must be remembered as if it happened yesterday.